Hello, today is Thursday, November 19th, 2020. My name is Jackie Pelota, and I'm here interviewing George Obayi for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American collection at the University of Texas at Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. But there are some questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes, I consent.
Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes, I consent.
Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I consent.
We have many questions in the pre-interview form that you already filled out, and we use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server, and before we would send it to the Benson Library, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or your family members. So that is not part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes, I consent.
On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone number or your email with journalists?
Yes, I consent.
Awesome. Thank you, George. I appreciate it. I know that's long, but so we can get started by having you maybe share a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Well, oh God, where to begin? Um, I am a fifth year industrial and systems engineering major studying at the University of Florida, pronouns he, him, and his. And in terms of positionality, I was born in Venezuela, in Caracas, moved here to the US where I grew up in Miami, starting around the age of 2. And I now attend the University of Florida. And what else about positionality? So I'm also cis, gay, or queer man, and I'm also of Syrian descent. So all these aspects are pertinent to my identity.
And so, as a student, how has COVID shaped your experience during this time?
So currently, all my classes are online, and I'm happy to hear that they are online. It was a pretty smooth transition for me personally when it comes to how classes were taking place. I'm definitely rocky in terms of having to go back to Miami for the initial many months of quarantine. I returned in April, and I didn't come back to my apartment in Gainesville until the beginning of this semester, so August. And so I was there for quite a while, and the longest I had ever been home since graduating high school. So that was a unique time period. And but COVID has I'm someone who prefers the online structure, so I'm happy to say it hasn't really affected me negatively in that aspect. Although I fear for those who are taking classes next semester here at the university. I graduate this December, but others are sticking around, and those students will be facing a system where the university is trying to rush towards having in-person classes again. And so many classes will have sections that are both in person and sections that are online. And there are student, and for some reason they're limiting seating so that you might just end up with an in-person seat, although there is no technical limit to online seats. So I know there are many students who will be forced in uncomfortable situations, and all just for a university that wants to validate how it feels about validate its strength when they're unfortunately misunderstanding what true strength is when it comes to protecting their students. So I am fine, yet my heart aches for those around me who are going through tougher times.
I know you shared a lot in your response, but I guess I'll start with asking you, especially with what you shared about graduating. Is there a particular reason that you chose to go back to Gainesville as opposed to staying in Miami?
A big reason was um, frankly just to have some time with them and to be with them, and they were quite concerned, given with this being a college town and what might take place here. Also, work wasn't really my work was canceled for the semester. Luckily, as federal work study and as an employee of the as a part-time employee of the university, they compensated me for the remaining of the semester. But I really didn't have much of a reason to stick around, and I viewed it as an opportunity to be with them. For the longest time, I would get to be with them until after I graduate, given that I didn't see myself sticking around in Florida, and especially not sticking around in Miami. Um, so that's a big reason why. Also, just to be there with them. They were, I'd rather be there with them and have that nice time together than be apart and have them also stressing intensely for me, since I know my family does, and has done that.
Okay, so then to clarify, you haven't come back to Gainesville, because I think, I mean, I misunderstood. So
Oh
you're
no, 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 no. No, I'm back in Gainesville now. I was in I left Gainesville in April, and I returned to Gainesville in August.
So why did you choose to come back to Gainesville even though you're graduating? Is there a reason?
I really value my independence, and I could only spend so much time cooped up. And I knew I'd have more freedom here. And I also have work, and my work is not remote. So my work does require me to come to campus. And luckily, unless I'm working front desk, I don't really interact with anyone else. So I have my own space. And whenever I work in my office space, there's only one other person, and it's a long room, and we're on opposite ends, both wearing masks. So there were no concerns to be had there. But that along with I wanted to be here, especially I renewed my lease, so I want to use the apartment I'm paying rent for. So just all those different reasons, and again, I wanted to be able to have more agency, um, and luckily my family saw that as well. That's something that they recognized and respected. The only issue was the logistics of coming back up here, but luckily they figured it out.
But you also mentioned that they were a little worried just because of the ways in which a college town functions at times. So can you, I guess, speak more to that from what you have seen thus far or heard thus far, kind of like how has that been going in a college town in the midst of COVID?
Well, it's definitely been going. It's unfortunately not ideal. There as even if you look at the headlines, our age demographic is one of the most careless ones, due to young folks like us feeling like we're invincible, and like we won't be negatively affected by this pandemic that affects everyone. And because of that, there are too many instances of folks who are not taking care of themselves or not having regard for those around them. Are The line of restaurants and bars next to our campus called Midtown is always bustling and full of folks, many unmasked, and you can even find similar situations downtown. And you even hear about fraternities and sororities on campus having their events and not really caring as much for COVID guidelines. And luckily, I do hear that some fraternities have been suspended due to their activities, but again, in a system that favors them due to how they support this institution monetarily, I don't see that. I don't see uh, I don't see too much disciplinary action being put against them. So I I recognize the situation is quite difficult. Yet luckily, I don't really I'm not really in those circles. When I'm on campus, I'm always, it's only there just for work. So unless they come to the Career Connection Center, I won't interact with these folks. I must also recognize that one of my coworkers is a very active fraternity member, and he attends many of their events. And I have another coworker, and she regularly goes out. They both claim to wear masks at these things, but again, these are folks who I see weekly. So this is a difficult situation where even those immediately in my vicinity have varying degrees to which they pay heed to the guidance and the suggestions that are being brought upon us. And unfortunately, it stems from an overall lack of organization in enforcing these regulations, not just from a university, but also from our state, due to our governor not caring much for this. And it can go back up even to our president not caring much to have a centralized approach. But yes, so campus is tricky, but luckily I stay away from the most risky areas because campus isn't the hot spot. It's everywhere else where people go. So I've been staying safe, and the main people I interact with are my roommates, and I make sure to get tested regularly. And speaking frankly, Miami's in a tougher situation, so it's not like it would have been much of an improvement there. So
Thank you for sharing that. So could you share, I guess, a little bit more about the types of students that you see or interact with that are being a little bit more
mhm.
um reckless, like like demographics wise? And then I'd like for you to also in that unpack, you mentioned that the university favors certain students in terms of how they support, and if you could also unpack a little bit of that as well.
So in looking at the different kinds of students, again, there are those who strictly follow all guidance, and whether it's driven by adherence to the rules or purity anxiety. And because I recognize that people's worries and fear about what's going on is another component that may influence their behavior. So there's definitely that. There are other folks who, again, try to follow common sense and adhering to these regulations. Um, then there's another category of folks who mostly follow things, but whether it's due to the permission they give themselves or the forget the wording I recently read somewhere, but it was more so like they were forget the wording, but like COVID like they were exacerbated and just tired just tired of COVID, and they thought like, okay, I've done enough quarantining, and they would like sometimes go too, and they'll go to a party with friends. And there are folks who have like more of these larger group meetings, and it becomes tricky because okay, you may have your set group or groups, but then those people have their own groups, and all it takes is one person in one group, no matter how many degrees away from you, to eventually have something passed to you. So it's not an ideal situation. And then there are those who pay even less heed to go to these larger events, to go out, to go to the club, go to bars, go to packed restaurants, and um, sure, they'll wear a mask, but that's doesn't matter because they're still enclosed spaces with many people. And then there are those who don't care one bit. It's all quite sad, and some of these folks, for instance, one of the individuals who I know who regularly goes to his events with his fraternity, caught COVID in the summer. So it's not like some of these people aren't familiar with what might happen to them. Unfortunately, if they catch it again, they might be in an even worse situation. So there's a lot of unwillingness to sacrifice fun for now, for safety in the long term for yourself and those around you. So whether it's like the superficial nature with which people view this, to them underestimating the situation. In terms of demographic, these different mindsets really, again, they span everyone. Because I will say, from what I've seen, those with more privilege in various ways tend to be a little bit more reckless. And again, it depends on what. There's no one set way, but there are certain aspects that just do seem to be more common, unfortunately, and more common, yes, more common, unfortunately, with how things are progressing, which is why people on campus or students regularly talk about their disgust with those who regularly go out to bars and clubs, and the large intersection that may have with those involved with Greek life. And the demographics that are common to Greek life, again, are also they may have certain parallels with those being reckless. Again, not to draw assumptions, but that's even just with the folks that I know. And I recognize, of course, there are people in those circles who are also taking care, but when looking at a lot of the images one even sees online, it's not really comforting. In what I referenced earlier about the campus having preference, I have not seen direct preference when it comes to COVID and its restrictions and how people are regulated or policed, or however you may want to describe it. I have not seen preference there, again, because I'm not part of, nor do I see a lot of that. But again, I'm just drawing extensions from how the university treats certain populations with any other issue. Again, they're lightest on those that are most affiliated with groups that largely donate to campus, and or largely have some sway in their image. And that is often Greek life. Those in fraternities and sororities do stem from larger organizations and larger families, or larger bodies of folks who do hold more sway and influence with this campus. So I'm not saying that that affects anything that is happening currently with how they're enforcing COVID, but I would not be surprised if there was anything there. Yet I do know there is sway for many other instances in the past that it'd be of the impact that they have on affecting student organizations, student politics, the preferential treatment that is given with how positions and awards are provided, to even just the visibility and funding that is present, and how they are then allowed the ability to reshape our university structure to better suit them and continue that process. So again, have not seen anything COVID related, but would not be surprised. and we are still yet to see how things are going to look in the coming months, especially with cases continuing to rise. I have not heard of such a spike here in the university, but with Thanksgiving coming on, I would not be surprised if there's another spike, and especially in January, there might be an even higher one.
Yeah, and you shared how you were getting COVID tested often, and so I'm wondering, is that through the university? Are there any
Mhm.
additional precautions that the university is taking, especially considering what you just mentioned, that people might be going home? So are there, is there certain messaging encouraging folks to stay?
So the campus has communicated that it's open to students not returning after Thanksgiving break, so they can just return for next semester. Also, recently the campus has, like just about an hour ago, the campus has announced that anyone coming for in-person classes needs to get tested. I do not know how they plan on enforcing that, nor how often they plan on enforcing that. I don't know if they know. But that is one thing that has become public. And I am happy to hear that people need to be tested to be in person classes. It sounds like common sense, yet I still don't believe we're ready to have in person classes. Um, so, tested or not, the risk is there. And I don't agree. I don't agree with the idea that students and faculty should be put at risk. So, I'm trying to think of any other precautions campus has really gone. In terms of Thanksgiving and the incoming holidays, that's the main thing, just encouraging people to stay home after leaving. And nothing new outside of the regular regulations that exist on campus of a mask being mandatory when you're on campus. Again, I stick to the student union and my walks back and forth from the bus stop and back to my apartment. So I have not seen Gator Campus outside of getting tested.
In relation to going home just because it is so soon, if you are going back to Miami, do you fear bringing it back home? And the same goes with kind of anyone that you are close with, if kind of that same fear or
The
anxiety.
concern of potentially getting family sick. So yes, that is a concern. Luckily, I have been quite cautious, but unfortunately, that can only do so much because all it takes is one person. And so yes, I don't plan on going down to Miami for Thanksgiving break. Those plans are still up in the air. My mother recently contracted COVID. She's already much better, yet she got retested this week and is still positive. So hopefully by next Monday, she is negative, and we can get back to our original plan of my mother and sister coming up from Miami to Gainesville to visit me. That way they can be here instead, and because frankly, this area is better anyways when it comes to COVID. So if not, we will see what my plans are instead of that. I might just stay here in town, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Um, in terms of concerns of getting my family sick, I do know that as the date approaches of my return to campus, I'll be getting tested yet again. I already got tested this past month, and I'll get tested again in the coming weeks to make sure that again there's no risk. I do believe I do still want to go back home in December for the holiday season. One, because the holidays and everything, people the usual things people um, the usual reasons why people enjoy the holidays. Also, because I want to be there so that I can be there in person with my family when I graduate. I don't care much for graduation and the whole ceremony, but it matters a lot to them, and I want to be there with them as they share that instance. It may be an online live stream, but I want to be able to share that time with them and be able to have that with them. I do plan on returning to Gainesville afterwards after I've graduated. I do have my lease, and until I graduate, until I move, I'd rather stick around here than in Miami because again, I already have the lease, and also I prefer that independence.
And so I'll follow up on a couple things that you mentioned, but I want to kind of start with, what you disclosed, your mom contracting COVID, and if, you can share more about that, if she shared with you how she contracted and kind of how all of that
Mhm.
trans.
My mother is the most cautious person in my entire family. She is the one who always strives to put herself in the least risky situations. So it especially pained all of us to find out that she was the one to catch it because she was putting herself in the least risky situations. Um, Literally, when first discussing whether the only two places where she thought that she could have contracted it was either her job or the one time she went out to get coffee. And something tells me it was not the coffee shop. Again, there's no confirmation as to where she contracted this, but she works at a school. And as it's already public knowledge, schools are in a nebulous situation here in Florida currently, and it's optional for students to attend. And there are students attending the K through 12 where my mother works. She does not interact with the students. She just has her small office next to other faculty member offices, and that is it. She's an administrator there. Yet unfortunately, she caught it. Of her coworkers, I'm aware of at least one other recently testing positive. And about the school in general, I've heard of at least 2 or 3 other cases before, months before. So there have been cases there. So it's quite concerning. And both she and I both prefer that she does not return to work on campus once she tests negative, because I don't see the need for such a risk when she spent the entire summer working from home and accomplishing everything that needed to be done. I do not know if they will listen to that. Unfortunately, I don't view that the administration that makes decisions for that K through 12 to be the most compassionate. Um, they do not care much for in my opinion, they do not care much for their students and what happens to them, nor do they for their faculty and staff. And that is the sad truth. And so I hope that she's given the opportunity to stay home. And if not, I hope that they're willing to budge if and or when my mother fights for it. But right now, the priority is her to get better. She has gotten better, but now we want her to test negative so that she can continue to take steps moving forward.
I'm really happy to hear that she's doing better, because we know that this virus, it's very the symptoms, it's like a spectrum, right? Like the symptoms and how bad it can be. And so what has it looked like? Has she just been kind of like self-medicating and trying to heal at home? How has kind of that process looked like?
She's been able to speak with her doctor, and so she's been taking care of herself. Again, she has been medicating for the symptoms and just making sure that she's fine there. Luckily, the most intense aspect of the symptoms were in the initial few days. So she has gotten better, and now it's more of just the serious cold in many ways. I don't know the details of her symptoms, but right now, but I am sure that she is definitely better now, and that's what I'm most glad and happy for. Um, but um, my main the main thing in me talking to her is ensuring that she's ready for whatever's next, and that she's taking care of herself, and that once she is better, that she goes and gets a flu shot, because I want her to be, because regardless of how hard COVID hits you, it hits you to some degree, and I would not want her to get a cold after that, because I don't want any sort of 1-2 punch, and either because I don't want her to get hit again hard by anything, and so I know that a flu shot will at least help contribute to preventing any future health issues.
Yeah, definitely. And so with kind of your other family being present in South Florida, how has that gone logistically? You know, if your family all lives together, you know, how what did that look like, being able to kind of contain COVID?
So back at home, my parents are divorced. My mother lives on her own, and my father with his wife and his stepdaughter. My sister alternates between the two homes. My grandparents have their own place, have their own jobs, and same with my aunt, her husband, and her kids. So those are really the main pockets of family that I have down in Miami. And so previously, in the initial phases, we would have family over, but only like one pocket of family at a time, um, and they would, for instance, we would try to, in the initial phases, we would even have them be in the back. Have them enter through the backyard, and we talk through the screen door that separates the house and the backyard. Of course, still wearing masks as well, and just like, but at least to see each other in person, and have a legitimate degree of separation. Um, but it has gotten tricky. They have not seen each other in person for quite some time now, just because with things worsening. But back when they did, that was those were the cases that they follow. Again, just trying to remain distanced, but it is difficult. My grandparents own a furniture shop down in Miami, and so of course they have customers. They remain masked while they work there and everything, and they ask people to wear masks if they're not wearing masks when they come in. But still, there is risk just because they're interacting with folks who they don't know. Um, so there's always that base level risk. So my mother's, again, the most cautious of the bunch, and nothing is gonna get in the way of that. My father, he's also quite cautious. He only leaves for grocery shopping and work, and going to a properly socially distanced time at a restaurant. So those are the only situations. There, and both of my parents are not the most strong when it comes to their health. So, which leads to me and my sister to be concerned at times for them, and which is why we really want to ensure that they're both okay. And she and I often discuss and ensure, just kind of check in with each other on, because what they say doesn't always match, as it often goes with parents. So we're happy we can be there to support each other and kind of cross-reference what we're being told and what we're seeing. And luckily, they've been more or less truthful, and that's been quite helpful. Again, not that mainly referring to them sometimes understating how they feel in these times, whether it's emotionally or physically.
And so kind of with that that change, you know, due to COVID, and then also just things worsening currently, but specifically in South Florida, have you and your sister had to kind of coordinate to, you know, ensure that your mom doesn't leave the house, you know, if she needs something, or, you know, how has that looked like?
Luckily, in these times recently with her being positive, luckily she already she's a very logistics oriented individual who's very pragmatic. So she already had all the food she needed, and she's been ready for doomsday. So she is good and has been good when it comes to food, and so she has been cautious and taking care there, not really coming out for much. So there was never any need there for coordination on that degree. The only coordination that existed was like more so of my sister finally going to her father's or our father's, and the because she was supposed to earlier, but again, because my mother tested positive, she stayed into quarantine with her. Although my sister tested negative then, again, she could have developed it after my mother tested positive, but she tested negative again after quarantining for 2 weeks. So she was cleared to leave and visit our father. So currently my mother's alone, but again, still with our support and with the hopes that she's negative by the time Monday comes around.
And I want to go back to something that you kind of had mentioned, in saying, well, that you were, glad that she was feeling better because then you all can maybe do something for your graduation coming up. And so I wanted to kind of go back and have you share, what has the university shared as it relates to what that might look like and kind of how you feel about that, because I think it depends. I think some people feel certain ways, but how do you feel about that, because it can be a really important day.
For me, I'm not one of those people. I don't really put much emphasis on graduation. I was excited for it for my family because they've been rooting for me this whole time. Being first generation, it's quite a big deal, and but unfortunately, that won't be the case. I had family and even my best friend planning to come and visit me, but things got thrown for a loop, a big one, and I'm fine with it. And again, they're dealing with bigger issues, so it's just something that they're sadly accepting. And again, it's a graduation this year is just going to be a live stream online. That's, I think, pretty sure going to then be posted on YouTube, where we'll be able to, they'll be reading our name, and we can even submit a photo and a description for a slideshow, and maybe even the opportunity to like record a short video as well. I think maybe limited to maybe like 10 seconds or so. So yeah, I'm doing that, and I'm in the process of figuring out what I want to do or say, or and that's for them, because I'm fine, and what I care about is the diploma I'm supposed to be getting weeks or months later, because I want to be done and I want to be able to move ahead into my career later next year. And so yeah, that's where I stand there. Quite upset that it is. Not surprised that it is online. Glad that it is online. What upsets me, though, and a common comparison people draw, is why football games are in person. And many people forget that graduation being online was a state mandate. But it's interesting how football wasn't mandated to be online. And again, the big reason why legally they hold some leverage is the money that they bring. So I wouldn't really view the economic impact of what they offer to such high regard. It's more so just how they fill the pockets of these universities. And I'm pretty sure the university would fight tooth and nail to keep their games, at least to some degree, over the graduation, because graduation doesn't really provide as much of a source of income to them compared to their precious games. And that's a preference they've had that I've gotten used to. Funny enough, this was supposed to be the semester I finally attended a game. Then this happened, and I'm not bothered either. I'm perfectly fine not having attended a football game. And so yeah, again, so overall, I'm not I'm not pressed, but I understand, and my heart goes out to those who are affected and who are upset with the situation that we're in, whether they're my fellow classmates or my family.
I appreciate kind of the connections you've made in sharing kind of those two parallel examples of things that are happening at the university. Do you know anybody that has gone to a game while like during COVID, like at all?
Just vague. Maybe a friend or two on Instagram, but nothing. No close friends.
With what, I guess, with what you've seen more anecdotally, what has that looked like, in terms of like COVID protocol?
People still find some way to tailgate, and people still attend the game. And I haven't seen pictures of the game. I don't know how cautious they are there. Again, like it's quite a big risk, and it's it's sad to it's sad to see, and it's concerning.
So I want to transition to another topic, and I know that you are very involved within the university in a leadership capacity, and so wanting to learn a little bit more about what that has looked like amidst COVID, and anything that has changed or been impacted.
Mhm. So I am the former president for UF's Pride Student Union. So just as I was transitioning and training the new president to step in for the organization, and this organization is presides over the LGBTQ student body, and so we've been the main group for quite some time here on campus. And so, as former president, former treasurer of that organization, been with that organization since I was a freshman back in 2016. I'm also the current treasurer for the University of Florida chapter of Out in STEM. It's a chapter of a national organization that focuses on queer folks in STEM careers. And so, with the way things have been on campus, it was definitely tricky, especially in the beginning of spring, because things slowly start to close more and more. But then now, basically, nothing's in person. Nobody's having in-person meetings, and people have had to adapt. Pride Student Union, along with the other various LGBTQ orgs on campus, hosts overall welcome assembly. Usually, that is attended in person by over 600 people. Unfortunately, that's not the case because nothing in person is happening. We are still able to use the ballroom that we were planning on doing it, but instead we filmed it and we streamed it live on Twitch. So that was what we provided instead. And it was a great opportunity. Still having various performers, whether it was dance to drag, and so it was a great opportunity. And even having their information public, whether it's how to connect with our organizations that are speaking at the event, or to even the various applications people can use to tip our performers online. Of course, all our performers were paid, but again, still, just tip culture is here in the U.S., and we want to still provide that opportunity for our performers to still receive those extra funds as well. So that was unique. But since then, all student organization meetings have been online. And in my discussions with Out in STEM, we plan on having, once next semester comes along and I'll be graduated, they don't plan on having any in-person meetings either. In fact, the Out in STEM National Conference was fully online as well. Everything has been online. Nothing has really been in person. All I've had is maybe one in-person meeting throughout my time, and again, it was both of us wearing masks, and it was because the individual had a very large office, so we had enough space to be socially distant as well. So yeah. So the situation for students on campus has been quite tricky. Luckily, people are adapting, leaning on technology and leaning on social media and finding those opportunities. Still, it does not match what the kind of interest and impact and turnout that in-person programming has, but people are making do. And I'm proud of them for the work that people are putting into what they're into making all this happen. Again, I've had my own fair share of intense conflicts, but a global pandemic was not one of them. So there's always something.
Yeah, definitely. It takes a lot of work and creativity to pivot in that way, and probably very quickly towards the beginning. And so you talked about turnout, and so would you say that turnout for certain events and programs are less, or are you, yeah, is it less? And then are you finding that maybe you're reaching different audiences that wouldn't come in person, or is it just like the same people that come to, all the same events?
Mhm. So there are different layers. Many people are just turned off because they want to have the in-person experience, and that's not the case for them. And due to everything going on right now, they're just not in the same mindset. So it's just not the same space. So again, especially with the programming that I've been part of, it's very community based and how you feel safe with people. And it's difficult to have that online as well. We're still managing, but it's definitely not the same. And there are other more introverted folks, even like folks who might be long distance and such. Those folks are happy to have access to this now, so that they can be able. It's less of a big jump for them to engage. So that's something that is nice. But again, that is a smaller percentage from what I've seen. And so overall, yes, the numbers are lower. And because overall students just aren't in that same mindset. It's very different to opt in for an online meeting compared to attending something in person and that whole experience. Hell, a big reason why student organizations are able to maintain their good attendance is because those they offer food at their events, and now that everyone's home, they can't really take advantage of that free food. So that's another key component that I do believe is overlooked in these situations.
Yeah, and to that point, buying food, I'm sure encompasses a good amount of the budget. And I'm intimately aware of how student organizations were struggling with funding pre-COVID. And so could you share about kind of how that has looked during this time, if it's been impacted, and maybe what might be, especially since I know you're intimately involved in a leadership capacity, what that might mean in the future, right, for these really important student orgs?
I feel like a lot of student organizations are kind of in a lull financially because a lot of programming is tied to what you provide and what you buy, and not a lot of it is virtual. There's not so many things you can buy virtually to offer people. So overall, people spending is lower because food is out of the picture. You can't hand things out. You can't hand out advertising materials. People barely table, and people who are tabling for their organizations, even if they may have things on their table for people to pick up, people are less likely to pick those things up because, again, they want to reduce contact. So spending is a lot lower, at least from what I've seen. The only space where spending might still be consistent, I don't know about higher, but is for speakers, because you can still have a speaker. It'll just be a Zoom speaker instead of in person. And there's value in that as well. OSTEM has not brought any speakers, so I can't speak intimately on that experience. But I have seen other organizations bring speakers. Hell, Pride Student Union's first event with their new e-board was collaborating with Black Student Union to bring the 3 co-founders of Black Lives Matter. Not bring, but like have them speak online. So that was a wonderful event and a wonderful opportunity. And there have been so many more online events, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to take advantage of them, partly just because I make myself so busy. So I can't tune into them. Either they're concerts or speaking situations, whether they're scheduled during my work or just I'm too busy studying, working on projects, or just focusing on me. So it's so there's that as a component as well. But in terms of finances, it's overall lower, and I'm curious to see what things are going to look like once things begin to return to normalcy. I frankly hope that's not spring, because we're not going to be ready. So I hope the campus doesn't force people to do that. I haven't looked around to hear what other organizations plan on doing in the spring. I hope that they're being cautious, but we'll have to see. Depends on the thoughts of those that are leading and those that might potentially attend their events. And but yes, I think because the financial situation was already tricky, because unfortunately, ever since a lawsuit from an external organization to the campus, our finance system was rewritten, and now it's basically on a first come first serve basis, which which is quite exclusionary for those who might just be a second late, and a bulk of accepted applications are submitted within the first few minutes. And now people are at home where they might have worse Wi-Fi or just worse overall situation. So it's harder for them to coordinate these things or even connect to get their applications in time. So I do know there are still organizations who are wrongfully not getting the funding that they need just because their request wasn't received in time. And by the time they got to them when they're going down the list, they didn't have any more funds. So, and that was, I feel like that's one thing. That's a small way that, or a decent way that COVID exacerbates that problem that's already present in our system. They've tried to remedy it by now creating a base amount that anyone can apply to of up to $500 per organization. That way, any mid to small organization that doesn't require much funding can be guaranteed that smaller amount, because many organizations don't ask for that much, but many ask for tens of thousands, and that is harder to allocate for, because all it takes is one big organization requesting $20,000 for tens or maybe even 100 organizations not getting money. So it's a tricky balance. And with the recent rule that passed and how they offer that base funding, I hope it works. I hope it's a good system. I see it potentially working, but I need to see it in practice once that money has begun to be dispersed next year. Funding has always been a tricky thing here on campus, and I don't know what it's going to look like in the future. And I advise all student organizations, and frankly, especially those from marginalized groups, to strive towards being financially independent from our university, or strive to be capable of being financially independent from our university, because we do not know where things are going to go in the future, and I'd rather prefer our communities to be safe and ready than to be horribly harmed by changes that can come down the line.
Thank you for sharing that. And for the purposes of this video, as you know, I am intimately aware, but for the purposes of this video, could you expand upon the situation that you kind of were referring to as it relates to how the funding structure had shifted? And then, since you took note of marginalized students and how their student orgs kind of should shift funding structures, if you could talk about how that new system that was in place, how that impacted specifically marginalized student organizations.
So Back in 2 years ago, the university received a lawsuit from the national arm of an organization that had a chapter here on campus, known as Young Americans for Freedom. This organization is controversial to say the least, and its values often oppose that of marginalized identities. And they felt that our funding system was discriminating against them. I can't speak towards that. I wasn't involved in those practices. I can't speak towards the situation. And they sued, and the university inevitably folded, paid for their legal costs, and said that they will work towards restructuring our finance system. Before, you have a base amount, and every year it either goes up by a little, goes down by a little. So it's more so focused on gradual change. So people said it. So they believe that it discriminated against them as a smaller organization that's just starting out, and regardless of the number of people that they have at their events, and that long-standing organizations had preference. And I believe there was some truth to that, given that, again, that there's precedent for long-standing organizations. But what is now lost in this new system is that there is no precedent or preference towards organizations that are more financially consistent. Because before, they evaluated your spending for the past semester, and they would determine you're quite wasteful because we gave you this much. You did not use $20,000 of your $40,000, and because of that, we're gonna only give you $20,000 next semester. Like, you're only gonna get what you used, because people often ask for similar budgets next year, the following year, and because you didn't use it all, you're only gonna get up to what you ended up using, maybe give or take a couple thousand or hundred. And but in this new system, it is now first come, first serve, because it's now, I wouldn't view it as equitable. It definitely, they claim that it's more blind in how it functions and not having preference, but it prefers those with better Wi-Fi, and it prefers those with better access. And again, those with more privilege tend to have those things. And again, there's also the fact that the previous system did not have to be fully removed to remedy the situation in which they found themselves in. Unfortunately, this came down from U.S. legal counsel, and that is where that came from. And that is why student government had to work to change the budget. So because of that, that is why our budget system is the way it is. Many longstanding organizations with large bodies ended up with no funding just because their funding requests were received a couple minutes late. And by a couple minutes late, if requests open at 8:00 a.m., anything received after 8:06 might not be counted, because everything received in those first 6 minutes will be up to that, then they're out of money. And that is the situation that our funding system is in right now. I can speak towards Price Union. They previously had almost $80,000 per year. Then they had about less than half, so more around 30 or so per year, more so around like 15-ish per semester. So less than half. And these things have an impact. I do believe again, there was a better way to do this. But unfortunately, that's the way that it happened, haphazardly, and still benefiting those who may act against marginalized groups, because these marginalized organizations were the ones with the most precedent and the longest standing, oldest organizations here on campus. So it's not just not liking those who've been here for a while, it's not liking what we stand behind. And certain groups might not complain as much if they brought folks that agreed with them. or by brought folks, I mean brought speakers or hosted events that agreed with them. But unfortunately, that was not the case. And they leveraged the resources that they had in an institution that favors their viewpoints, and it played in their favor, and it hurt many organizations in the process. And we're still reeling from that and finding new ways to adapt. That's why I encourage students to find other opportunities, whether it's collaborating with a campus itself in its departments for sources of funding, because many of them have allocated segments dedicated for sponsorship or co-sponsorship. I also encourage folks to reach out to alumni, and I saw that need in that there wasn't much connection with LGBTQ alumni, because our group was inactive for quite a few years. I think last time it was active was maybe 2015. So I'm now in the process of bringing it back, and I'm doing a lot of work to archive information for our community. Yesterday I met with someone who was an advisor back in the 80s. The day before that, I spoke to someone who was big on campus in the early 2000s. I'm trying to work to rebuild our past, to better inform our present, to empower our future. And yes, alumni are a source of funding, but also a source of experience and a source of resources that will help empower these folks and navigate these issues in the future, to find these new solutions. Because whether it's the rampant racism in this country, the rampant coronavirus in this country, or any other system that preys upon folks, there are ways to organize and navigate through these situations to strive for something better. And with everything going on, I'm still optimistic, and I'm hoping what I'm doing, what I have done, can contribute and continue to push towards better results.
I appreciate, your perspective and the amount of work that you have put into this, just knowing you personally. And so I know that it spans this kind of short amount of time that you're speaking of. And so I value that, and I value your work.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I want to, because I am cognizant of time, but I want to, have you maybe talk a little bit, since the bulk of your work has been within the queer community, at your institution, and I'm interested to hear if there has been any unique um, impact within the queer student community, specifically during this time in COVID, whether it be, um, thinking about isolation or whatnot, just anything, I guess, unique that you can gather from the specific community that you serve.
So I would say it has been tough on the community, because most folks don't immediately live with fellow LGBTQ folks, or see them on a day-to-day basis. So our organizations, our community, our friendships, these things provide an anchor and support in these times. So things are strained. So folks who really heavily lean on those around them are in tougher spots, which is why I've been making sure to check in with folks that even I haven't spoken to in a while, to make sure that people feel okay, and I encourage others to do so as well, because losing your support network can be devastating. And organizations, community, these things might also function as a passive network that supports folks, and it gives you your fill, your need, and your set. But when that's stripped away, you might realize that, okay, you might need to formalize and create some sort of support for yourself, especially in these trying times. I hope that folks continue to take care of themselves and exercise caution. Because again, members of our community are also still can still be negligent and still have risky behavior. So whether it's going out, hookup culture, or anything in between, I hope people exercise caution. And although everything overall has been like limited, but still, people are adapting in different ways, and some are impacted more than others. So I encourage people to try to check in with one another and ensure that people are satisfied and have their needs met.
Have you seen, UF or anyone else try and kind of pull together resources to support folks during COVID-19, or even like within the organizations that you're involved with? Because not only is it a health crisis, but also an economic crisis, and so if you can speak to that.
In terms of economic resource, economic help, just like people often say college is a microcosm of the real world or the real world post college, and just like our country, there's only been one stipend. Students only there was only one stipend outside of the federal one that was provided to students. Our student government allowed people to apply for some sort of rent relief, I think with a maximum of $500. So, but that covered a month of rent many months ago. Outside of that, there really hasn't been much. So, in terms of economic help, in terms of social, again, us student organizations have been trying to do what we can to create a space for folks to still interact and be happy and be with other folks. I'm trying to think if there's really been any other formalized push outside of that. None that I'm aware of, but I also recognize that I've been further disconnected as a senior on his last semester. I'm on my way out, and I'm lucky enough and privileged enough to be in a good situation. So I haven't sought out those resources. So I'd like to think there are more than what I've mentioned, but I cannot say for certain.
And so as somebody that is on their way out, and I know where you're headed, but if you can share kind of what are your plans for after
Mhm.
graduation, and kind of what does that look like amidst COVID, if anything has changed, because I know.
Mhm. Oh yes, that's definitely affected things. In fact, I was waiting on one other. I received an offer from one company, but basically I was between my two dream companies. One gave me an offer, and the other couldn't give me the opportunity to go to their final round of interviews because due to layoffs that they've been having, due to being strained by the economy, they no longer had any demand for new folks. So I was on hold when it came to moving forward with the process. But luckily, I had two dream companies and I got the other one. So I'm super happy and proud to be saying that I'll be working in federal consulting next year, and I'll be moving to DC. I will be starting either summer or fall. I find that out in the next 2 months. And in the meantime, I'll be spending spring here in Gainesville because again, I have my lease, might as well use it. And again, I enjoy that independence. Prefer to be here than cooped up in Miami. And in January, the company will reevaluate the state of the country really, and figure out if it's going to still allow people to work remotely. I don't see that changing, so I will likely still be working remotely. I don't know how long they'll push back the time until the next time where they have to reassess. I don't know if they'll make it the full year or 6 months. These times are tricky. People are hoping things are normal by winter 2021, but we can't be certain. So, which I mean December. But yes. So there are many different paths. Ideally, I'd like to move closer to when my lease is ending. That way I don't have 2 apartments to pay for. But I am privileged and happy enough to have both a signing bonus and a job that pays well. So I'll be if I have some months of overlap, I'll be fine. I can manage as a student who's luckily not graduating with too much debt, or and is luckily in a position that is quite good. So I'll make do either way. Can't wait to find out which way we're going. Hopefully, I'll know by January with both my start date and if the company is having us be in person or not.
Well, again, congratulations. I'm sure that you are so excited, and just want to reiterate how proud I am, because I know I've seen you at Showcase the last couple of years, and so it's like full circle, and you're on to bigger and better things amidst the pandemic, and so yeah, I'm proud.
Thank you.
So I know that you are, as you keep mentioning, are in a very privileged position, and so with if you know any other folks that are graduating in December or even in kind of May, since I know the recruitment process starts a little early. What has been the experience of some of your friends? Have they been able to secure opportunities like you have, or has it been a little bit more challenging?
It's varied. For my friends in STEM careers, I haven't seen much of a change, especially a lot of them already had pre-standing relationships with organizations that they've interned with before. So internships and continued connections help promote job security. And as long as the company of interest is not in some sort of hiring freeze, they are fine. I So I have a lot of friends who are, again, moving, whether it's Melbourne, Florida, or to somewhere in California. Others are enjoying the privilege of job security. But others, I do have trying to think of my my roommate, for instance, he is not studies journalism, and he's often described the time that we're facing as definitely the toughest and the longest time that has ever been for journalists. Just because, again, it's not a lot of folks aren't being hired as much, and it's not always like a priority to hire for. People might need more engineers, but people might stick to just the journalists that they have and move forward with what they have and what they can do. So it's trickier. So not I so yeah. It's a mixed bag, but luckily I don't know of anyone in a terrible situation. Like my friend currently also has a full-time job, so he's fine in the meantime, in other field, but so mixed bag.
And so I want to wrap things up, because I know we're almost at time. And so, is there anything else that you would like to share with me about your experiences with COVID-19, or just kind of in general during this time, since we are also experiencing like a racial reckoning, right? And so, if you have anything else that you would like to share that I've not asked about.
I think one thing that's quite important is something I kept on warning campus administration and student leaders is to be ready for fall. my first semester at UF was for the fall 2016 election, and it was a very dark time on campus where hate crimes were the highest they've been in quite some time. And I feared the same thing would happen this time. One positive of COVID, that did not happen because people were not really interacting with one another as much. So that's one thing I am happy for, and it's been interesting. Another thing, but people also being relegated to being online also doesn't lead to the best conversations or discourse. So tricky conversations are harder to have, and it's hard to enter those online. And those topics are better to be broached in person, and people don't have those opportunities as much. So I hope that when things are eventually better, those conversations are further eased, because having a racial reckoning during a global pandemic isn't the most optimal situation. Again, I believe people should be open and willing to change and learn no matter what. But I recognize that it might be even harder to facilitate that with everyone being online. And also many people suffering from other issues on top of everything else. So it's difficult. But again, I'm trying to stay optimistic for the future and keeping myself and those around me accountable as we all move forward, and as I hope to create new opportunities for folks, whether it's here on campus, even after I graduate as an alumnus, or even when I move to DC.
Well, thank you, George. As always, it's always a pleasure to speak to you, and I appreciate your experience and stories and perspective that you've shared with us today for the archive.
You're welcome. Glad I could share.